Today I'm going to take a look at 5 essential albums from Creation Records that you should have in your collection. However, I will talk about a 6th instrumental album at the end of the list. First, let's take a look at a little bit of the history of Creation and why it was such an impactful label. Creation Records was founded in 1983 by Alan McGee, Dick Green, and Joe Foster. Previously known as Creation Artifacts, the label would go on to hugely influence the late 80s and early 90s, releasing a slew of albums that would come to dominate and define shoegaze, Brit pop, and more. Ultimately, the label folded in 1999. Let's start with number 1. The alternative rock band The House of Love begins my list with their self-titled LP from 1988. Formed in 1986 by Guy Chadwick, the inspiration and desire to start a band stemmed from a performance that he attended by the Jesus and Mary Chain. This concert led to him writing Christine, which is among the band's most heralded songs and a personal favorite of mine. Within this self-titled LP, The House of Love gives us a variety of subgenres that were the foundation for shoegaze sounds Creation would be releasing a few years later. Alternative rock, indie rock, neo-psychedelia, and noise pop. It's important to note that The House of Love had a few self-titled releases. Their first 2 studio LPs in 1988 and 1989, respectively, were self-titled, as is a 1987 compilation out of Germany that features early singles by the band, including favorites Shine On and Nothing to Me. Nowhere by Ride often rounds out the top 3 shoegaze albums of all time. If you see a list and it's talking about shoegaze and the best shoegaze of all time, it's probably in that spot. Nowhere is the band's debut LP from 1990, and like The House of Love, it had deep alt-rock leanings. Where other shoegaze bands drenched their sounds in a wall of noisy guitars or created surreal soundscapes through dreamy melodies, Ride found a comfortable, more accessible middle ground. Sure, they embodied both of those kind of opposing traits, but the pop-centric melodies really kind of set them apart. The album debuted in the UK charts at around 11, a record for Creation at the time. While the albums that followed for Ride never quite lived up to the success of Nowhere, they still are championed by fans of shoegaze and 90s indie rock. Vapor Trail, the final track on this album, is likely their most well-known and the most beloved track by fans. This is Loveless by My Bloody Valentine. Taking 2 years to record and credited as nearly bankrupting Creation in the process, it is truly an essential. Recorded between February of 1989 and September of 1991, a whopping 19 different studios were used to record it, and a variety of engineers. An estimated 250,000 British pounds, about $500,000 today. This is the epitome of Creation Records. It is the quintessential shoegaze album, topping damn near every shoegaze countdown and influencing countless indie rock bands that followed. The album defined the noisier side of shoegaze with an overwhelming wall of distorted sounds. You know that thing I mentioned earlier? That was My Bloody Valentine. You can hear this on opening track Only Shallow. The one that really drew me in to this band and this album, though, was When You Sleep, which is a little bit more subdued. I recently covered Hide Your Eyes, a bootleg, and noted that it contained a slew of recordings from Slowdive just between their debut LP, Just for a Day, from 1991, and their follow-up, Souvlaki, from 1993. If you haven't checked out that one yet, it goes deeper into the mindset of the band after failing to really gain favorable nods from critics after their debut LP came out in 1991. After 40 or so songs were written and recorded to demo, McGee discarded most of them, calling them shit. Slowdive returned to the studio, and the result was Souvlaki, an album that follows Loveless on top shoegaze album lists and comes in at number 2 on pretty much all of them. This is the dreamier, more surreal sound of shoegaze, pulling in influence from Loveless and from other bands like the Cocteau Twins. Allison often gets credited as one of the top songs on the album, but there is a lot to love here. Sadly, at the time, it received just as mixed reviews as the band's debut. Dave Simpson of Melody Maker even stated, "I would rather drown choking in a bath full of porridge than ever listen to it again." I mean, how British is that? Given that it was originally shunned by critics, it's astonishing in retrospect, especially given the acclaim that it receives these days. Slowdive recently released a new song called Kisses off of their forthcoming LP, Everything Is Alive. That album is slated for a September 2023 release on Dead Oceans, 30 years after the band gave us Souvlaki. While it appears Good Humor is the only Saint Etienne album to physically have been released on Creation Records, at least originally, the electropop and Eurodance trio out of the UK is no stranger to the label. Their debut LP, Foxbase Alpha, has a phonographic copyright credited to Creation as well. I'll dig into that in a second. Good Humor was quite a bit of a departure for the electropop and dance pop sounds that Saint Etienne was known for. Tiger Babe, their third album, Good Humor being their fourth, strayed a bit as well with more acoustic tracks, but it still fit comfortably into dance and synth pop genres. Good Humor didn't fit those though. Here they give us something that blends dreamy pop sensibilities with kind of bossa nova sounds. It's important to note that Saint Etienne's primary label, Heavenly, had strong ties to Creation Records. Remember that phonographic credit that I mentioned earlier? Well, Heavenly founder Jeff Barrett worked in the early 80s as a record store manager and live music promoter, often putting on shows featuring notable Creation Records bands of the day. Creation ultimately brought Barrett on as a full-time employee, where he worked between 1985 and 1988. He founded Heavenly in 1990, and the single for Only Love Can Break Your Heart by Saint Etienne was among the first few releases that the new label put out. So the parallel between Heavenly and Creation is really no surprise. Barrett leaned a bit on Creation as he formed his new label. There are my 5 albums from Creation Records that you should have in your collection. However, plenty of other greats were released on Creation that have not made it into my collection. In lists covering the label, you'll find releases by Primal Scream, Swerve Driver, The Cramps, Teenage Fan Club, and The Jesus Is a Mary Chain. The list goes on, including one key one I have not yet mentioned. Despite not being in my collection, I have to highlight that one more release, and it is, of course, Oasis. In the years after the original shoegaze era, the most notable release on Creation was the debut LP by Britpop outfit Oasis. Released in 1994, Oasis exploded onto the UK airwaves, and any thought of shoegaze dwindled in favor of the burgeoning Britpop scene. That Britpop sound ultimately found its way to the US, receiving widespread mainstream airplay here as well. Live Forever off of Definitely Maybe is a perfect example of one of those early tracks that hit the US and UK airwaves and just dominated. What I have to ask is, what is your favorite album on Creation Records? What's the favorite one in your collection? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, dig into this right here. It is my coverage of Hide Your Eyes, that obscure, rare bootleg by Slowdive that I mentioned earlier. I'll see you next time.